First story. I had been living in this apartment complex for about 3 years, and during that time, I had only ever exchanged a few words with my neighbor, Mr. Holman. He was an older man, probably in his late 60s, and he kept to himself. We all have that one neighbor who's a bit of a mystery, but Mr. Holman took it to a whole new level. No family ever visited him, and no friends ever came by. He left early in the morning and came back late at night. Always alone. I had my suspicions about him, but I never paid them much attention. After all, it's not my business what he does with his life. He could have been a retired professor, a reclusive artist, or even just someone who preferred solitude. But all of that changed one particular Friday night. It was the dead of winter, and the snow outside had piled up pretty high. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when I heard something strange. A loud thud, followed by a scraping sound, like furniture being dragged across the floor. I paused for a moment, wondering if it was just the wind rattling the windows. But then I heard it again, louder this time. The noise was coming from Mr. Holman's apartment next door. At first, I thought maybe he was rearranging furniture. But at 11:30 at night? In the middle of a snowstorm? That didn't make sense. I felt a growing sense of unease. I had never heard a sound coming from his apartment before, not even the creak of a door. And now this? Something about it didn't sit right with me. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was none of my business. But the noise continued, persistent and strange. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself tiptoeing towards my front door. I pressed my ear against it, hoping to get a better sense of what was happening next door. The dragging sound continued, punctuated by an occasional dull thud. That's when I heard it, a muffled voice. Faint, but unmistakable. I froze. Was he talking to someone? Who could possibly be in there with him? For a man who had lived in complete isolation, the idea that he suddenly had company in the middle of the night was bizarre. My mind started to race with possibilities, none of them good. Was someone hurt? Was Mr. Holman in trouble? I decided to check it out. Maybe it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and quietly opened my door, stepping out into the dimly lit hallway. The corridor was eerily silent, except for the occasional hum of the heating system. I stood in front of Mr. Holman's door, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the silence that followed was unsettling. I knocked softly, almost hoping he wouldn't answer. But to my surprise, the door creaked open slightly. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open wider, stepping into his apartment. What I saw stopped me cold. The apartment was nothing like I had imagined. It was sparsely furnished, with only a worn-out couch and a small coffee table. But that wasn't what caught my attention. No, it was the walls. Every inch of them was covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn maps. It was like something out of a crime drama, the kind of thing you see when someone is trying to solve a conspiracy. And there, in the middle of the room, was Mr. Holman. He stood hunched over the coffee table, his back to me. I could see him scribbling something frantically on a piece of paper. His grey hair was disheveled, and he muttered to himself under his breath. I took a step forward, my eye scanning the room. That's when I saw it, a picture of me. It was taped to the wall, along with several others of my neighbors. Some of the photos were of us coming and going, others were taken from odd angles, like through windows or across the street. My stomach turned. What the hell was going on? I must have made a noise because Mr. Holman suddenly whipped around. His eyes widened in shock when he saw me standing there. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us knowing what to say. I didn't mean to intrude, I stammered, backing up towards the door. I heard a noise, Anne. Get out, he snapped, his voice shaking with panic. You shouldn't be here. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me. My heart raced as I stumbled back into my apartment, locking the door behind me. My mind was spinning with questions. Why did he have pictures of me? Why was he watching the other neighbors? Was he some kind of stalker, or was there something more to it? I barely slept that night, my mind consumed with worry. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That my neighbor had some creepy photos on his wall? It wasn't exactly illegal. And then there was the fact that Mr. Holman had never been anything but polite to me, even if he was distant. Maybe there was an innocent explanation, though I couldn't imagine what that would be. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, half expecting to see Mr. Holman. But it wasn't him. It was a woman I didn't recognize, holding a small stack of letters. "Hi, sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm Mr. Holman's daughter. I've been trying to get in touch with him, but I couldn't reach him. He usually sends me letters every week, but I haven't heard from him in a while. Have you seen him?" I hesitated, my mind flashing back to the night before. Yeah, I saw him last night. He seemed off." Her face fell. "I'm not surprised. My dad's been dealing with some mental health issues for a while now. He's paranoid, thinks people are watching him, following him. He even thinks the neighbors are part of some conspiracy against him." Everything clicked into place. The photos, the maps, the frantic scribbling, it wasn't about us at all. It was all in his head. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "I hope he's okay." "Me too," she sighed. "I'm going to check on him. Thanks for letting me know." As she walked away, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of relief and sadness. Mr. Holman wasn't dangerous, just a man trapped in his own mind. A man who had spent years living in fear of things that weren't real. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized how little I really knew about the people around me. Second story. A few months ago, something happened to me that still messes with my head. It wasn't a life or death situation, but it was one of those moments where you realize how one small decision can snowball into a whole series of unexpected events. This all started with something as mundane as finding a lost wallet on a bus. It was a regular Tuesday morning. I was running late for work, as usual, and barely made it onto the bus. I took the first seat I saw, headphones in, minding my own business. About halfway through my commute, I noticed something on the floor under the seat in front of me. It was a black leather wallet. It looked expensive, but pretty worn down from use. I picked it up and glanced around the bus. It was pretty full, but no one seemed to be looking for anything. I debated what to do, hand it over to the driver, leave it at the lost and found, or try to figure out who it belonged to myself. I figured I'd check for some ID and maybe contact the person later. If it were my wallet, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. Inside, there was a driver's license belonging to someone named Ben Carter. He looked to be in his 30s, clean-cut guy. There was a bunch of credit cards, a couple of receipts, and to my surprise, a wad of cash, maybe $300 or $400, at least. It was way more than I expected to find in an everyday wallet. I've got to admit, my first thought was, who the hell carries this much cash? But my second thought was, this guy must be freaking out. I mean, losing your wallet is bad enough, but with that kind of money in it? I knew I had to get it back to him. When I got to work, I looked him up on social media. His name wasn't exactly unique, but after a bit of digging, I found someone in my city with the same name and face. Bingo! I sent him a message explaining that I'd found his wallet and was happy to meet up to return it. It didn't take long for him to reply. He was ridiculously grateful, said he'd been panicking all morning and couldn't believe his luck. We agreed to meet at a cafe near my office after work. When I got there, he was already waiting. Ben Carter turned out to be a bit different than I expected. He was twitchy, constantly looking around like he was expecting someone to jump out at him. I handed him the wallet, and he immediately checked inside, counting the cash right in front of me. A little weird, but I brushed it off. He thanked me again, though he didn't seem as relieved as I thought he would be. Just as I was about to leave, he stopped me. "Hey, listen," he said, "can I buy you a drink?" It's the least I can do. I wasn't planning on sticking around, but he seemed genuine enough, and it felt awkward to say no. So, I agreed. We sat down, ordered a couple of beers, and made some small talk. The conversation was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ben kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was nervous about something. Eventually, I asked him about it. "Everything all right, man? You seem kinda tense." He hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice. I've been having a rough time lately. Some stuff I'm dealing with. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." I laughed a little, thinking he was exaggerating. "Try me." He paused for a moment, then said, "Let's just say, some people are looking for me. I'm not the kind of people you want to mess with." My stomach dropped. This wasn't what I signed up for. I figured he was just going to tell me about a bad breakup or work stress. Now he was talking about being on the run from someone? I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, trying to play it cool. He must have noticed my discomfort because he quickly changed the subject, asking about my job, my life, trying to make things casual again. But the whole time, I was hyper-aware of the fact that I was sitting across from a guy who apparently had dangerous people looking for him. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to make things awkward, especially since he was the one with the shady situation. After a couple of beers, I made an excuse about having to get home, and we parted ways. I figured that would be the end of it. I did my good deed, returned the wallet, and now I could move on. But things got weirder. The next day, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Ben. He thanked me again for returning his wallet, but also asked if I could do him a small favor. He needed someone to hold onto something for him for a few days, just until things calmed down. At this point, alarm bells were ringing in my head. I didn't respond. There was no way I was getting involved in whatever mess this guy was in. But then he started calling. I ignored the first few, thinking he'd get the hint, but he didn't. The calls kept coming, and the messages became more desperate. He said he didn't have anyone else to turn to, that it would just be for a couple of days, and then he'd be out of my life. I couldn't believe this was happening. I found some guy's wallet on the bus, and now he was trying to drag me into his problems. It felt surreal. Finally, after about a week of ignoring him, the calls stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, figuring he had given up and found someone else to help him. But then, a couple of nights later, something freaky happened. I was walking home from a late shift at work, and I noticed someone following me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but every time I looked back, there was this guy in a hoodie, always keeping a bit of distance. My heart was racing, but I didn't want to confront him, so I sped up, hoping to lose him by taking a few random turns. No luck. He stayed right behind me. I finally made it to my apartment building and bolted inside, locking the door behind me. I peeked out the window, but the guy was gone. I don't know if it was just a coincidence, but after everything with Ben, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected. The next morning, I called the police, not to report anything specific, but just to let them know what was going on. They took down my information and said they'd keep an eye out, but there wasn't much they could do since nothing had actually happened. For the next few days, I was on edge. Every time I left my apartment, I felt like someone was watching me. I started taking different routes to work, avoiding the places I normally went, just trying to stay off the radar. Eventually, things seemed to calm down, and I didn't hear from Ben again. I never found out what happened to him. Maybe he skipped town, or maybe something worse. I don't know. All I know is that I never should have picked up that wallet. So, if you ever find someone's wallet on the bus, think twice before getting involved. You never know what kind of trouble might be lurking behind something as innocent as a lost wallet. Third story. Alright, let me take you back a couple of years to a time when I had just started my new job at this mid-sized marketing firm. It was my first real job out of college, and I was eager to prove myself. I was fresh-faced, naive, and ready to climb the corporate ladder. Little did I know, I was about to find myself in the middle of a bizarre situation that would leave me questioning everything about office life. So, let's set the scene. My boss, let's call her Sarah, was one of those intimidatingly perfect people. Always put together, always knew what she was doing. I looked up to her, a lot. She was the type of person who could make you feel like you were the most capable person in the world, even when you were sweating through your shirt trying to give a presentation on Google AdWords. Anyway, one random Wednesday afternoon, we had this big team meeting. It was the usual stuff, updating each other on projects, new client pitches, the works. Toward the end, Sarah dropped this bombshell. Apparently, something confidential had been leaked to one of our clients, and it wasn't just some small tidbit, it was serious information that could have compromised a deal worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Naturally, Sarah was furious, but she was also calm and methodical in how she was handling it. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she said, her voice steady but sharp. Now, here's where things started to get weird. Sarah had this idea. She was going to talk to each of us individually. The idea was to get a sense of who might have been involved, or if anyone had heard or seen something suspicious. Since I was new, I thought this wouldn't be a big deal for me. I didn't have access to any high-level information yet. In fact, I was still learning how to use the coffee machine properly. But of course, Sarah decided to start with me. I remember sitting in her office, nervously fidgeting with my pen as she closed the door behind us. "I'm not accusing you of anything," she started, "but I just need to know if you've noticed anything strange going on lately." In that moment, my mind went blank. Had I noticed anything? No, I hadn't. I mean, I was just trying to keep my head down and not mess up anything too badly. But then she asked, "You haven't seen anyone acting odd, have you?" And that's when I remembered something. There was this one guy, Mark, from the IT department. He was always kind of quiet and kept to himself, but lately, he'd been extra weird. He'd started showing up to meetings he wasn't invited to, and he'd linger around when people were talking about projects he wasn't even part of. At first, I thought he was just trying to be friendly, but then I realized he never really contributed to the conversations. He'd just hang around, like he was eavesdropping. I hesitated for a second before mentioning it. "Well, there's Mark from IT," I said. "He's been acting a little off lately." Sarah didn't say much, but she raised an eyebrow and made a note on her notepad. "Thanks," she said, and that was the end of our meeting. Over the next few days, I didn't think much about it. I figured Sarah was doing her rounds, talking to everyone, and that was that. But then things started to unravel in ways I didn't expect. A week later, Sarah called another team meeting. This time, Mark wasn't there. She told us that the situation had been resolved and that there was nothing more to worry about. But rumors started swirling around the office. People were saying that Mark had been fired, that he was the one who had leaked the information. Some people even said he'd been escorted out of the building by security. I felt a pit in my stomach. Had I just gotten someone fired? Feeling guilty, I tried to find out more, but nobody was talking. It was like the whole thing had been swept under the rug. One afternoon, I ran into one of the IT guys in the break room. I casually brought up Mark's name, and he just shrugged. "Yeah, man, I don't know what happened," he said. One day he was here, the next day he was gone. I started obsessing over it. What if I'd been wrong about Mark? What if he was just socially awkward and had nothing to do with the leak? Did my offhand comment in Sarah's office contribute to him getting canned? The weirdest part came about a month later. I was walking to the parking lot after work when I noticed someone sitting in an old, beat-up car near the back of the lot. As I got closer, I realized it was Mark. He rolled down his window and waved me over. My heart was racing. I had no idea what he wanted, but I went over to his car. He didn't look angry or anything. In fact, he looked kind of relieved. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I just wanted to tell you, thanks." I blinked. "Thanks? For what? He sighed and leaned back in his seat. For mentioning me to Sarah. I know it wasn't easy, but you actually helped me. I was completely thrown off. Helped him? How? It wasn't the leak, he explained. That was just a cover. I'd been trying to get out of that place for months, but they wouldn't let me quit without making things difficult. By you mentioning me, it sped things up. Sarah and HR thought they were solving a problem, but really, they were doing me a favor. I stood there, speechless. Mark gave me a small smile. I've got a new job now, something way better. So yeah, thanks. And with that, he rolled up his window and drove off, leaving me standing there with my jaw practically on the ground. It was the strangest turn of events. I had thought I was part of this big office drama, maybe even responsible for getting someone fired. But in the end, I'd inadvertently helped him out of a bad situation. Life's funny like that, I guess.